Welcome back, horror fans, cinephiles, and giallo enthusiasts. This is Tanner Leeser, your host for all things giallo here on The King in Giallo. Our next stop on our journey through giallo cinema is the one and only giallo film from Tonino Valerii, My Dear Killer, released in 1972.
In this video, I will give you a condensed version of the full-length overview video covering only the cast and crew and the plot of the movie. Then I'll transition into the Gialli Tally. The Gialli Tally will contain heavy spoilers.
Let's waste no time, so here is My Dear Killer Overview. My Dear Killer, also called Mio Caro Assassino, is an Italian-Spanish co-production released on February 3rd, 1972. The film is directed by Tonino Valerii, who also co-wrote the screenplay along with Franco Bucceri, Roberto Leoni, and Jose Gutierrez Maeso, who is credited but factually did not contribute and was listed for co-production reasons. Music is composed by the maestro Ennio Morricone. The cast is comprised of George Hilton as Inspector Luca Peretti, Salvo Randone as Commissioner Mauro, William Berger as Giorgio Canavese, Marilù Tolo as Dr. Anna Borghesi, Patty Shepard as Paolo Rossi, Piero Lulli as Alessandro Moroni, and Helga Liné as Mrs. Paradisi. The plot follows the investigation by Inspector Peretti into the deaths of an insurance investigator who was decapitated at a work site and the apparent man who operated the excavator. What the others deem as an open and shut case of accidental murder and then suicide appears to Luca to be a cover-up for something deeper. Through the course of the investigation, Luca finds ties to an unsolved case from last year, a kidnapping of a little girl and double murder of the child and her father. Now, one by one, more victims begin to pile up, all of whom may be in possession of evidence which could expose the kidnapper. Luca manages to focus the list of suspects down to the little girl's family, but time is running out.
But I digress. On to the Gialli Tally. Spoilers ahead for those of you who haven't yet seen the film. You've been warned. My prediction for the movie's Gialli Tally score. In my unscripted movie review, I predicted between 550 and 600 points. Well, let's begin the Gialli Tally. Beginning, as always, with the pre-viewing cliches. The repeat offenders are 1 point for actor, 3 for writer, 3 for composer, and 5 for director. George Hilton was in The Devil with Seven Faces, The Case of the Scorpion's Tail, The Strange Vice of Mrs. Ward, and The Sweet Body of Deborah. 4 points. Salvo Randone was in The Possessed. 1 point. William Berger was in $5 for an August Moon, and The Murder Clinic, 2 points. Helga Liné was in So Sweet, So Perverse, 1 point. Ghia was in The Blood-Stained Butterfly, 1 point. Alfredo Mayo was in the Folds of the Flesh, 1 point. Corrado Gaipa was in The Fifth Chord and The Man with Icy Eyes, 2 points. Marilù Tolo was in The Double, Kill the Fatted Calf and Roast It, and Night of Violence, 3 points. I realized that I did not count Kill the Fatted Calf and Roast It in the repeat offenders before, but I will henceforth. So, any movie with John Sorrell or Pier Paolo Capone after 1970 should add 1 point to those films' final Gialli Tally scores. So this includes The Forbidden Photos of a Lady Above Suspicion, The Cat O' Nine Tails, A Quiet Place to Kill, A Lizard in a Woman's Skin, and The Short Night of Glass Dolls. Thank you. Remo De Angelis was in The Blood-Stained Butterfly, 1 point. And Ennio Morricone composed for Four Flies on Grey Velvet, Short Night of Glass Dolls, The Black Belly of the Tarantula, The Fifth Chord, The Cold Eyes of Fear, A Lizard in a Woman's Skin, The Cat O' Nine Tails, The Forbidden Photos of a Lady Above Suspicion, The Bird with the Crystal Plumage, Vergogna Schifosi, and A Quiet Place in the Country. 33 points. Cliché points for the title. My Dear Killer contains the word killer. 5 points. First look, 25 points for the Italian director, and an additional 15 points for the movie releasing during the golden age of giallo cinema. And I don't imagine most would say that this is a quintessential giallo, but I, the King in Giallo, hereby decree that My Dear Killer is a quintessential giallo. 15 points. And would you look at that? It is plot o'clock. We open with the coldest of cold opens. 5 points. This man in a suit seems very interested in finding something in this swamp. The excavator intended to dredge the water starts up. Z is for zoom. 5 points. The man yells out to begin. Y is for yelling. 5 points. However, the apparatus picks up the man, crushes him, and drops him and his head beside the swamp. After the opening credits, our detective, Inspector Luca Peretti, pulls up. His boss, Chief Mauro, tells him the details. The deceased, Umberto Paradisi, had rented the digger and the driver for one day. Mauro is certain the driver, Mario Anzuini, accidentally killed Umberto, then fled the scene. He says he'll handle the rest, but Luca insists forensics will do their job. Inside the machine, Luca finds the address to the earth-moving company. The owner of said company recognizes the deceased man, saying that he had paid in advance, and that usually doesn't prompt further questioning. Luca asks if Anzuini drinks. Q is for questions, 5 points. The owner says no more than anybody else. What's more, that Anzuini has a family and a perfect safety record over his 15-year tenure. This accident or murder is unlikely. M is for morgue, 5 points. Paradisi's wife confirms the body's identity. T is for telephone, 5 points. Luca calls Dr. Anna Borghese, his girlfriend, and alludes to them meeting tonight. Luca speaks with the widow, who informs him that they actually were not married and that Umberto was a sales representative for a company. She doesn't know which company, but states that he didn't keep any records at home, nor can she guess why he was at the dig site that day. She relays that he'd been so strange lately. Exposition dumping, 2 points. As it is, no criminal record can be pulled up on Mario Anzuini. A call comes in. They've found him. Anzuini is found dead, hanging, with a bottle on the ground and a kicked-over drum. Luca notices that the drum isn't tall enough to have supported Anzuini. Luca briefly speaks with the doctor, then releases the person who discovered the body. Animals featured, pet dog, 2 points. Luca drops the bombshell. This is staged. This is a murder. He asserts that Anzuini's cervical vertebrae would have broken, which would have extended his body an extra 2 to 3 centimeters, but as of now, that would imply that beforehand, that it is impossible that he could have stood on the drum and applied the noose. Rather, someone hung Anzuini, then placed the bin and booze at his feet to imply a remorseful motive. A murder is faked as a suicide, 5 points. Mauro tells his friend at the papers what to print regarding the murders. R is for reporter, 5 points. Luca enters and demands they dredge the swamp immediately to know what Paradisi was looking for. Dredging efforts are underway now. Luca suspects they might find a body. He learns a vagabond named Mattia lives in this shack overlooking the swamp. Police have already talked to him, but Luca has some questions of his own. Inside, he finds Mattia and a woman, Adele. Mattia is rather defensive, which, as he explains, is because he has a knack for picking up whatever he finds thrown out into the swamp and taking it back to his shack. A sort of finders keepers. Luca doesn't see any issue with this. However, Mattia is still unable to provide any testimony towards the murder because he was not home when it happened. Adele says that the two are engaged, and Mattia brings her all of the best things he finds. A TV, a radio, things like that. Lastly, she says that the swamp actually formed recently, months ago after a pipe ruptured, and asks if this investigation is related to the Moroni case, but Luca has no idea of what she's talking about. Luca now has dinner with Anna, his girlfriend. Anna is upset that the two hardly are able to see each other because of their schedules and alludes to her desire to have a baby. Luca is upset that Anna would rather talk about this than just have a nice evening. After a moment, Luca relents. Anna is right. They kiss. They get hot and heavy. N is for nudity, 5 points. Necking, 5 points. Outside, a person clad in black snoops about. G is for gloves. Extra points for them being black, 10 points. Killer's identity is hidden due to the framing and editing, 2 points. The person peers inside, spying on Luca. V is for voyeur, 5 points. The killer overhears Luca tell Anna that they didn't find anything in the swamp, but next he will check Paradisi's house. Luca now searches Paradisi's clothes and finds a set of keys in one of the pockets. Mrs. Paradisi suggests that maybe they belong to the insurance company where Umberto had previously worked a year prior. The head of the insurance company says the key is not one of theirs. Luca finds out that Paradisi was employed as their best insurance investigator, but had left on his own accord after the Moroni case. This jars a flashback for Luca when Adele had told him about the Moroni case. This case involved a kidnapped little girl, and Paradisi was tasked with investigating the insurance claim associated with it. Luca learns the particulars of the case. C is for children. Extra points for the child being killed. 10 points. The little girl, Stefania, had disappeared from her house without a trace. The parents agreed to the ransom and did not involve police. The father had tried to follow the mediator of the deal, but this resulted in him getting abducted as well. Months later, they were found dead. The insurance claim was on Moroni's life, and his daughter was the beneficiary, so their identities had to be verified. In the Moroni case file, Paradisi recorded that the witnesses he interviewed were Rita, the wife and mother, Oliviero, Moroni's brother, Giorgio Canavese, Moroni's brother-in-law, and Paola Rossi, Stefania's schoolteacher. Mrs. Paradisi telephones the station, but since Luca is away, she informs Brigadier Bozzi here that the post office had called her and said a lockbox assigned to Paradisi is expiring, and she wonders if this could be related to the keys they found. She will take it upon herself and go and check. On her way there, the killer begins to stalk her. Mauro chastises Bozzi for not knowing that the post office cannot telephone someone regarding a private lockbox, and this is likely a trap. The police peel out. Reckless driving, 5 points. Due to heavy traffic, Luca gets out and proceeds to the post office on foot, but inside, the killer is stalking closer. First person POV, 5 points. As soon as the lockbox is opened, Mrs. Paradisi is attacked and strangled with her scarf. The killer rips the contents from her hand and flees. Luca arrives too late. He questions the witnesses. W is for witness, 5 points. One witness tells him that it was a tall man. Another witness says it was a stocky young man. But this third witness says the killer was a bald young man. On the body, Luca discovers a torn piece of paper with a child's drawing on it. Odd clue, 5 points. The drawing is of a house. In the bottom corner where the paper is torn, they see the last letters of a word stamped on the paper. The letters belong to Benedictine Institute. Luca speaks to the teacher, Paolo Rossi, who confirms the drawing is Stefania's because she signed all of her drawings with a flower as her signature. She tells him she hasn't shown this notebook to anyone, then confirms that she spoke with Paradisi concerning Stefania. She relays that his questions pertain to any information that could help them positively identify her body, which was found in an advanced state of decomposition. The notebook was supposed to be picked up by the family, but wasn't, and whether Paradisi had informed the family is actually not known. They look through Stefania's notebook. All of the drawings display the flower signature. They find the section where the page was torn out from, and it matches. Paola recalls the prompt for this drawing, which was a week before Stefania had disappeared, was to draw a house where you would like to live. Luca and Mauro try to speculate why this drawing was so important to Paradisi. We watch Paola leave the school now carrying the notebook and being stalked. The detectives are dumbstruck until an officer dropping off sandwiches tells them that it appears to be a house on a hill between two small trees with something funny on the roof. Luca suddenly remembers the shack overlooking the swamp. Mattia's shack was near to where Stefania and her father were found. Stefania was there before. Paradisi made this connection, and the killer murdered him and his wife to obtain this evidence. Luca realizes the killer will be looking for this drawing and orders the police to warn Paola and to send a squad car to her house immediately. Paola notices her tail and runs as fast as she can home. But because she's not home, there's no one to answer the phone. Paola rushes to the door and bursts inside. She slams the door, but an umbrella prevents the door from closing. After a struggle, we see it is a goofy man. Paola's neighbor, in fact, in the apartment. Despite also being creepy, he doesn't seem to be a threat. The phone rings as she steps inside, but then stops. Outside, the killer calls Paola, but doesn't say anything, and eventually leaves the phone line open. Extra points for T is for telephone for the killer making a call. another 5 points. Some noises summon Paula over to the window, where she jumps at the sight of a hand outside, but it is only a glove hanging on a clothesline. She sees a patrol car drive by and feels safe. Inside, she watches Django until the front door rings. I don't think Django would ever play on TV, but maybe I'm wrong. She lets the person in, seemingly recognizing them. The killer, now inside, locates the notebook, then sits to talk with Paula. The police cannot get a hold of her because the line is still busy. Paula tells the killer everything she knows. Satisfied now, the killer finds a circular saw and traps Paula in the bathroom, where she is brutally murdered. The notebook is then stolen. Bozzi tells Mario that Paula was attacked with the saw, but ultimately she was beaten to death with a statue. He warns him that Luca is upset over what happened. Luca shows Mario the only evidence found, which was a fragment of a statuette used in the murder. Art featured, extra points for it being central to the plot, 10 points. The statuette was not a part of Paula's furniture, meaning the killer had brought it with them. They piece together that she willingly let the killer inside. Luca is upset that the killer knew about the notebook evidence, which suggests that he is getting sloppy and somehow that information had fallen into the killer's hands. He feels personally responsible for the last 2 murders. He asks about the detective who handled the Moroni case, but that man has been transferred. Mario tells Luca to do whatever he needs to do, and Mario will shield him from the press. Luca goes to speak to the mother, and right away it is clear that she is suffering from some form of grief in which she still believes her daughter is alive. Talking with her is futile, and so Luca next speaks with Oliviero, the brother of Moroni, and his wife. F is for fashion for Oliviero's attire here, but also Luca has had some great fits as well, 5 points. Luca wants to know about the investigation being reopened, and Oliviero is eager to help in any way. His wife, however, wishes they'd all just move on. She blabs to Luca that Oliviero lives in the shadow of his brother, and during the war, Oliviero had saved Alessandro's life, which cost Oliviero his right hand. She also reveals that Oliviero is so caring that he lost a lot of money recently paying a charlatan who had come forward to claim that he had information about the kidnapper, but then suddenly disappeared once he had the money. Oliviero says the case was already closed, but this man came forward with new information. Luca asks if this man's name was Paradisi, and this is confirmed. Luca reveals to them that Paradisi was in fact recently murdered. Luca speaks with the Moroni staff now, who were all working here back when Stefania was kidnapped, but none of them has any useful information. The family driver says he was washing the car when the little girl disappeared. A is for alibi, 5 points. They take Luca back to what had happened that day. They looked for the missing girl, then the phone rang. A man's voice said to collect 100 million and to not notify the police. After the call, the driver walks in. Later on, Moroni received a letter saying where to meet for the money handoff and asked Oliviero to complete the transfer for him, and Oliviero agreed. The staff says they were surprised that Mr. Beniamino didn't volunteer, considering he was so attached to the girl and would spend hours with her. Luca finds this odd, but realizes that most of them had all spent time alone with Stefania. Luca now speaks to Beniamino, a sculptor, who admits that he cherished the time he spent with Steffi and recalls many of the places where he took her. Beniamino states that it was good for Steffi to get out because her family was fighting over her. Her father wanted her, but the mother, incensed by her brother Giorgio Canavese, had now insisted on 100 million, until Moroni threw Giorgio out. Beniamino doesn't suspect any of the family members and thinks it would have been best if the girl was just given to someone else in the family to avoid the whole conflict. Luca confronts Beniamino about paying someone to find out the identity of the kidnapper, which he admits to, because, as he says, he wanted to look into the face of one who could destroy such innocence. Just then, a little girl walks in, naked. Beniamino says to her to wait for him, and she exits. He tells Luca the little girl is a model for his sculpture. Luca, after staring the most judgmental daggers into Beniamino, tells him about the teacher's recent murder and asks him about the piece of statuette they had found on her body, but Beniamino denies any knowledge of it. Luca leaves, and on his way out, stops by the little girl jump roping and looks up at Beniamino. Later that night, Beniamino gathers some of his statuettes, drives out, and tosses the satchel of them into the river. Evidence seen being hidden or destroyed, 5 points. L is for lies, 5 points. Beniamino flees the area, but the satchel is collected by Mattia. A flashback shows Oliviero meeting the person to perform the money handoff. He is jumped by a gang of men, but his brother, Alessandro, comes to his rescue. Sandro is beaten and kidnapped. Luca then orders Mario to look into the conflicting eyewitness reports from the post office. In the car, Luca is told how Maroni and Stefania were found 2 months later in a bunker. The girl had died of starvation. Luca hands off a file on Giorgio Canavese, who mysteriously created a lot of wealth for himself with a new company. Luca interrogates Giorgio and is able to get him to play ball by providing proof the police have that Giorgio's truck company is also smuggling. Luca says such a company would have cost a fortune to start, about 100 million. Luca gives Giorgio an offer. If Giorgio helps him out, Luca will clear up a charge Giorgio received months ago where he was caught in a brothel with 2 minors. Giorgio agrees to play ball. Luca asks him if he ever paid to find the kidnappers, but he says no, he paid someone who was blackmailing him. Luca notices an identical excavator outside the window and asks where Giorgio was the day of Paradisi's murder. But Giorgio has no record of this in his ledger. He simply says, "I don't know where I was." Luca tells Mario that the kidnapper clearly killed Paradisi because of some bit of evidence which they believed was sufficient enough to connect the crime back to them. The dead may have been able to provide similar evidence even if they didn't realize it before their deaths. Luca states that Paradisi found the drawing, which was done a week prior to Stefania's kidnapping, proving she had been in that meadow beforehand. But with who? Also, Paradisi was killed looking for evidence in the swamp. Evidence which either does not exist or is no longer there. Luca also suggests that since Paradisi never told the family about his inquiry into the swamp, this might suggest that he did not trust them. Luca is back at the swamp. He looks around and notices the bunker. He enters inside and we see a flashback of the crime scene. Police say Maroni was beaten to death and the girl starved. The only evidence was a rusted nail with a shiny tip. Luca looks through a window and can see the shack from across the water. He has an idea and tosses a cylindrical piece of masonry out the window, which rolls all the way down into the reeds. Luca seems to have a theory. Just then, in walks Oliviero, his wife, Giorgio, and Beniamino. They are here for the anniversary of the tragedy and to pay their respects. Outside, Giorgio and Oliviero ask Luca if he has any clues. He confesses to them that he believes that before her death, Stefania managed to launch an SOS out from the window, a message of who the killer is. He doesn't know what the object was, but whatever it was, it led to the subsequent murders. Later in bed with Anna, Luca cannot perform because he's anxious about challenging the killer earlier. He believes that whoever it is knows what the object was hurled from the window. Luca calls Mario, who assuages him that all of the suspects are being closely monitored. The two start to argue, then Anna hands Luca a mirror so he can see what he's become. But this gives Luca an idea. The object may have been a mirror. The rusted nail they found with the shiny tip was what held the mirror to the wall. The phone rings, and Luca is told that the cops following their targets have all lost them. Luca tells Anna that Paradisi must have figured out what the object was, but he didn't know that the swamp hadn't always been there. But he brought the digger to look for it. But the reality is that Mattia took the object long before the area became a swamp. The killer bursts into Mattia's shack. Inside, we can see the statuettes thrown out earlier by Beniamino. Mattia is beaten to death with a statuette the killer had brought with them. This they leave at the crime scene. Luca proves this statuette is the same one which killed Paola. On the wall, Luca finds Adele's number and address. Luca rushes to a store and buys a phone token. J is for J and B, 5 points. Luca calls Adele, warns her to lock up and to not let anybody in, then asks her about a mirror that Mattia had given her. She finds it, but she's out of time. The killer is at the door. The phone line goes dead. Close up on a door handle lock, 5 points. The killer locks Adele inside the house. They climb the stairs, then peer into the bedroom through the keyhole. The door is locked, but they break the window pane and enter. Luca arrives just in time. The killer draws a blade and slashes at Adele. Luca climbs the outside and jumps into the building. The killer is forced to leave without the mirror. Adele is still alive. Luca searches for the killer, but they escape by car. Luca checks on Adele, then retrieves the mirror. Mario has the entire family and staff assembled. Luca enters and begins his speech. Eventually, he states the course the killer took was first to attack Alessandro's money, next his daughter. Luca continues, stating the mirror here contains the proof of who the killer is. He name drops the title of the film and says the killer hated Alessandro. He says the killer concocted the kidnapping but had to ensure Stefania died so she would never reveal who her kidnapper was. Luca informs them that the subsequent murders were all unnecessary because none of them had any evidence or knowledge of who the killer actually was. The kidnapper's fate was sealed long ago by Stefania herself. We watch a flashback showing Stefania toss the mirror out the window, which rolls down the hill and lands at the pit, which Mattia notices and goes to collect. Lucas says the killer's identity is here on the mirror and goes to everyone and shows them their reflections in the mirror. One by one by one, they all see their faces in the reflection. At last, Luca goes to Beniamino, announces he will finally reveal the killer's face, and flips the mirror over. Beniamino screams, and the killer takes the lights out. In the darkness, the police secure all the exits and restore the power. The mother shouts for her little girl. Extra points for wise for yelling for a hysterical woman yelling. 5 more points. With the lights on, Beniamino asks where the bastard is. A voice begs for the lights to be turned off once more. Luca and Maro approach the voice, which is hiding behind a chair. Behind this chair, they find Oliviero, weeping, ashamed. Luca kneels down and says that despite Stefania being unable to write, she was a great drawer. Oliviero admits to the killings, to everything, asserting that he hated Sandro and everything he had, Sandro's money and his daughter, are all his. Luca says, book him. The camera pans down, revealing Stefania's drawing on the back of the mirror, which shows Oliviero's likeness. A stick figure, missing its right hand, signed by Steffi with a flower. Mirror being used beyond its natural purpose. 2 points. The movie ends there. I'll add up a few more cliches. S is for secrets to Oliviero, 5 points. I will not be adding extra points for the killer having an impossible to predict motivation because the first scene we meet Oliviero, we actually receive his motivation. O is for obsession. Extra points for the killer being obsessed, 10 points. Hidden identity of the killer until the final moments, 5 points. The killer is killed by someone, referring to Mario Ansuini, who is hired to kill Paradisi, 10 points. And the accomplice is killed. Again, Ansuini was killed by Oliviero, 5 points. I initially didn't add these two, and I actually had them in the section of cliches I would not be adding because I don't recall us ever actually confirming that Ansuini was hired by Oliviero to kill Paradisi. But you go back in that first scene, the guy getting into the excavator is wearing a Canadian tuxedo, and that is Ansuini. It might be a plot hole, who knows. I will not be adding mistaken identity of the killer because police only suspect Ansuini for a few minutes. I won't add chase because the moment with Paula I don't consider a proper chase, nor when Oliviero escapes when Luca is searching for him. I won't add aardvarking because I don't think they were quite there yet. And I won't add K is for knives because this blade here appears to be either a razor or a box cutter type tool. And that's My Dear Killer. Now, I talk extensively of my opinion in my unscripted movie review for My Dear Killer, but to reiterate, I enjoy this movie. I think it is very underappreciated and underseen. There are a few plot holes like the one I discussed, but you kind of have to go searching for them, like really, really think about the details, and then you might say, wait a minute, wait, what happened there? Wait, that doesn't quite make a lot of sense. Regardless of that, I think there is so much to love about this movie, and it is such a gem and deserves to be seen by more people. Let's segue to the Gialli Tally cliches for this movie. Post-Giallo viewing cliches. The reason for the killing. I'm going to say revenge and psychological trauma, but I could also go with mental illness, psychopathy, and obsession. Both tiers are the same points. 7 points. The reason for the investigation. I'll only be looking at Luca's investigation, and he is a police investigator. 2 points. Bonus points. The style bonus. So, This movie is way more grounded in its visual style than most giallo films. I could only find a few zooms, and none that I can recall were crash zooms. We did have a decent amount of POVs, and loads of slow motion for the flashbacks, and great usage of mirror shots, which were actually intentional aspects of the plot, not just being used for style. Out of a maximum of 25 points, I will give My Dear Killer 12 points for its style bonus. Not too much, but the techniques they did use, they used quite frequently and effectively. I am surprised that a spaghetti western director didn't use any crash zooms. That just blows my mind.
Well, I guess there was a crash zoom on Adele's lips.
Soundtrack.
La sua statura per la rottura delle vertebre cervicali sarebbe...
Che sei venuto per il caso Moroni?
Sì, il caso di quella bambina che fu rapita.
Il rapimento e la morte di Stefania perché sapevi che se mai l'avessi restituita...
It's Morricone. Yes. 15 points. Bad effects. Yes. And the fake head? I'll give it 13 points out of 15. Final look. Extra points. The Deadpool, tallying how many kills and deaths are featured in the film. I break it down as thus. 10 points per kill or death scene for the main Deadpool, plus any stylistic kill multipliers, which we didn't add yet, plus the knife kill bonus. We have Umberto Paradisi, decapitated, 20 points. Mario Anzuini, garroted or strangled, 13 points. Mrs. Paradisi, garroted or strangled, 13 points. Paola Rossi, bludgeoned, 15 points. I will add base points for a mutilation though, so 3 points. And Mattia, bludgeoned, 15 points. Extended Deadpool for those other deaths mentioned but not seen, I'll give 3 points for each. We have Alessandro, my god, I can't say Alessandro Maroni and Stefania. 3 plus 3, 6 points. Okay, now, yes, we do see their bodies, but to me, this wasn't enough to count these as us seeing them. Unlike, say, Anzuini. Yeah, I'm sorry, but I just didn't feel right giving those full points. Red herrings for the total number of legitimate suspects in the film. 5 points per legit suspect are awarded. We have Mario Anzuini, although this is resolved rather quickly. Mattia, Oliviero Maroni, Giorgio Canavese, Beniamino, the Maroni's driver. And these last two, I never really thought so, but they are included in the finale, so I think the movie intended for us to also suspect them. And these are Eleonora Maroni and Carla Maroni. 40 points for red herrings. Flashback sequences, 5 points each. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, and 18. 90 points for flashbacks. Nudity, I award 5 points for ass, 7 for breasts, and 10 for genitalia. Real quick, I want to say that, yes, I will count the controversial instance of nudity, but I will not attempt to show it in any way. I will not blur it, I will not obscure it, I am not showing it. We have breasts, everything, and breasts. 43 points for nudity. Ladies and gentlemen, For My Dear Killer, I awarded the film an AZ score of 17 out of 26. With the bonus points for these, we have a modified score total of 110 points. And for the full Gialli Tally score, I award My Dear Killer a Gialli Tally score of 604 points. Compared to The Short Night of Glass Dolls in first with 969 points, The Case of the Bloody Iris in second with 830 points, and Slaughter Hotel in third with 827 points, My Dear Killer is in 15th currently, behind The Night Evelyn Came Out of the Grave. I predicted around 550 to 600 points, and so yeah, I was right in the ballpark. Honestly, I was a little worried though as I was going through the movie, like, wow, there's actually less cliches than I thought, but yeah, all the flashbacks really did carry this one a good deal. But like I say, these points do not mean a movie is better or worse. Please like this video, share it with your friends if they are horror fans or cinephiles, subscribe to The King in Giallo if you haven't yet, and if you have any questions, thoughts, curiosities, or concerns, leave those below in the comments section and I will get back to you. Give The King in Giallo a follow on Instagram and a like on Facebook. Subscribe to The King in Giallo Patreon to see early access to the YouTube videos, exclusive video series that can only be found there, and to generally support what I do. Next time on The King in Giallo will be the overview, the unscripted movie review, and the Gialli Tally 4, 7 Bloodstained Orchids, directed by Umberto Lenzi. Thank you all very much for your continued support, and a special thank you to those who support me on Patreon. This is Tanner Leeser for The King in Giallo, and if nothing else, I'll see you next time.